market. I'm Alex Coffey alongside Kevin Hinks. Kev, is there anything to update here? I'm watching the markets, but these up days, these bounce back days just don't have the same amount of action as the downside days. It's been a steady, pretty respectable recovery here for equity markets, as I said, particularly within the Russell 2000. Is there anything else that you got your eyes on here? Crude oil on the move, bond market selling off here a little bit. What's Kevin focused on?
Yeah, the market has basically erased all of Monday's losses. Now, the market doesn't go up as fast as it goes down, but this is still really healthy, price action here after Monday's big sell-off. So, yeah, crude oil is kind of a head shaker on everything that we saw in crude oil this week, and inventories going up and crude oil strong. That's kind of a head scratcher, but there's always one, Alex.
Yeah, and there always is head fake sort of moves. Massive down move in crude oil on Monday. A little bit of an attempt at follow through yesterday before we saw the ultimate bounce, and then a big bounce here again today. But let's talk some Domino's Pizza. It's time for cash tags. I'd like to welcome in TD Ameritrade Network contributor Jenny Horn to the program, as well as the VP of Research at LikeFolio.com, Megan Brantley. Jenny, Domino's is, I say pizza, but this is far more than pizza. This has been a textbook execution in terms of building out technology, changing perception of brands. So it's really actually an interesting company to watch, whether you're trading it or not.
Yeah, they were sort of at the forefront of food delivery when they made their Domino's Pizza Tracker, and their new CEO sort of unleashed all these different new items on their menu to sort of expand their offerings. Now, what is interesting is you say they're not typically pizza, but they are technically the largest pizza chain in the world with over 18,000 stores in 90 countries. So it's important to keep in mind their international presence is pretty significant. Now, they have earnings tomorrow before the market open, and the shares actually prior to last week were nearing all-time highs when they saw a good degree of selling. So they have seen a pretty strong upward trajectory over the last year outside of really the last week. Now, what they are facing is very difficult year-over-year comps because this was one of those names that was sort of a standout food establishment during the pandemic. Now, last quarter, they did see their sales rise about 17% year-over-year, which was driven by same-store sales in the U.S., which increased about 13%, and international sales, which increased about 12%. And they have not actually posted a decline in their U.S. same-store sales since 2011, so a pretty solid track record there. Another interesting stat I saw is in the first quarter of 2021, it marked their 109th straight quarter of positive same-store sales for their international business. So in terms of growth and same-store sales, they are doing very well internationally. Now, in the last year, they've also continued to open new stores, which I always find impressive given sort of this difficult environment we were met with. They just opened 175 new stores just in their first quarter alone. So they are growing at a very healthy pace. Now, one thing I will say is a little bit concerning is their average price target among analysts right now is about $460 a share. So that is a little bit concerning considering it's a little bit below the stock's current price, which could suggest some sluggishness as we head into the future. But historically, Domino's might shock people. It's actually been one of the best performers over the last decade or last 2 decades even. And I was looking at a 10-year chart, just absolutely astounded with sort of this upward trajectory it's seen, which is what actually our first tweeter of the day talks about, which says, who would have thought one of the best performing stocks of the past 20 years would be Domino's Pizza? If you would have invested in Domino's in 2008, you would have made well over 100 times your money. What is the next Domino's? Now, of course, the million-dollar question, if we all knew that, we would, of course, be investing in it. So, that is, sort of up for debate. But what I think is so important is, like I mentioned, just their ability to grow in this difficult environment that was 2020, which is what our next tweeter talks about, which says, Domino's Pizza is opening its 18,000th location today in La Junta, Colorado. The company has nearly doubled its unit count since 2010, when it had 935,000 locations. Most of the growth has come outside of the U.S., but it added about 1,400 locations here. So, obviously good for its growth, Megan. Like I just highlighted pretty much all of the positive with its growth. So I'm curious what you're seeing. If, I'm being maybe a little bit too optimistic on Domino's Pizza, it is probably my favorite pizza chain.
Yeah, whenever we look at overall mentions of people who are talking about ordering pizza for delivery or for carryout, these chain restaurants, we see Domino's is still maintaining the massive proportion of market share. So I think that they're around 46% of market share versus a Papa John's versus a Pizza Hut. So they really are the biggest player in the game, especially even when it comes to consumer demand. And when we look at this from, this is on in the past 90 days, the percent of those demand mentions that have come in. When we look at it in the past 365 days, so extend that period, Domino's has actually grown its piece of that pie a little bit. So I think that's something solid to look at from a market share perspective, that this continues to be the dominant name in the space. But overall, we are seeing some just near-term weakness from all of the chains that we're tracking. I think Domino's purchase intent has dropped about 7% quarter over quarter. And I think this is, there is a little bit of seasonality in these pizza chains, as you tend to see, increases alongside these big sporting events, especially as football resumes and things like that. However, there is a little bit of weakness, I think, that can be attributed just to this reopening. And maybe now that people are going out and going to restaurants, they may be less likely to, stay in and order a pizza for delivery, especially versus last year. This chart that you're looking at right now, this is one of the bright spots I think that you could hit on for Domino's. And this is an area that they've been trying to develop recently, and that's their carryout. And I think it's funny because as I was researching, Domino's is kind of infamous for being skeptical of these third-party delivery companies that have come out. And their CFO is quoted as saying, in 60 years, we've never made $1 delivering a pizza. And so I think that, they make money off of their pizza, but not off of the delivery. And so this kind of transition to carryout makes a lot of sense. And this is an area that we're tracking really heavily moving forward, just as consumers are increasingly receptive to this curbside delivery. Could this be a potential, growth mechanism for Domino's moving forward?
This is an interesting segment because I was going to start my segment with, it's hard for people from Chicago to talk about national pizza chains because we're such a local, pizza community. And then Jenny Horn says this is her favorite pizza. So I'm like, oh my God. I go, Jenny, don't worry. I don't blame you. I blame your parents for letting you eat Domino's pizza. That's right. So, but that being said, you know what I found fascinating, Megan? You're highlighting 3 national pizza chains: Papa John's, Domino's, and Pizza Hut. Pizza Hut, obviously part of Yum Brands, so we know that one. Papa John's, kind of an up-and-comer, right? I mean, growing. We a lot more media on them. But if you look at Domino's, and they are, by percentages, the dominant one, and I think this company's quarter, like last quarter, is they're just trying to hold on the demand that got pushed forward to them. Last quarter's earnings were down 2%, and the stock flew higher because if they can hold on to the advances they made during the pandemic, then they're in an unbelievably healthy place. But my question for you, Megan, is this: is Papa John's gaining ground? Is that what I'm noticing by your data, that Papa John is slightly gaining ground on Domino's here? And if they are, how much ground are they gaining?
I'm really glad that you picked up on this, and maybe it's because I'm jaded that Papa John's is this local Louisville establishment. Even though it's a national chain, it feels local if you live around where I live. And what we've seen is actually a really strong improvement in consumer happiness with Papa John's. And so this is something that we've been tracking for some time, especially considering, the politicized events that have happened in the past 2 years for the company as a whole. But overall, we're starting to see this consumer happiness return for Papa John's. It's up about 8 points on a year-over-year basis. People really like the Shack partnership. I think that was an excellent, kind of highlight and kind of almost rebrand for the company. And then people also like these new menu items. We actually saw the new Epic Stuffed Crust Pizza. I don't know if you guys have tried that. It's really good. And then they also have these Papadillas. And so these different, these new product innovations are starting to move the needle a little bit. And so we're seeing that definitely help Papa John's become more competitive. So from our data, when we look at this from an earnings perspective from Domino's, we've got an earnings signal at 11, which is pretty neutral for us. there's just really tough comps coming up, and our data isn't overwhelmingly positive or negative. There are some bright spots for sure, but nothing extremely actionable or flashable that we're keying into. And so maybe the bigger story here, for us at least in the data, is that Papa John's is finally, almost having a comeback with consumers. And so this is definitely something a little bit more positive in this name long term.
I think it's an incredible situation because there's so many factors at play here. One is this kind of last mile delivery, which pizza's been trying to do this for years and years now. So if there is an area that was able to somewhat execute on it in a favorable way, I'm not surprised to see that all three of these names are among those that happiness has actually gone higher. I'm with Kevin. I was going to say the same thing. If you're in a pizza city like New York or Chicago, you probably don't have much of an opinion on the product here, but what I do know about Domino's is this hasn't always been the case. Domino's wasn't perceived or the market leader really until, I would say, the last half of a decade. They completely reinvented themselves from a product standpoint, and they really focused on technology. So as you kind of look at this situation go forward from here, Megan, is the biggest threat other companies like Papa John's, or is the biggest threat things like Grubhub and Uber Eats delivering, I don't know, sushi or Shake Shack or something completely different than pizza that maybe we couldn't do 5 or 10 years ago?
Yeah, I think that you're exactly right, Alex. This generic food delivery, when we look at that, that's actually still recording growth, at least from, versus these 2019 levels. And we look at generic pizza delivery, that's fallen off versus these 2019 levels. So whereas pizza used to be your only option, now there are more options available. And you also had restaurants that, kind of flushed out these curbside pickup systems and, just giving consumers more options and more ways to pick up an order if they don't want to go down and sit down at a restaurant. I don't think that these pizza companies are going anywhere for sure, but the competition is definitely there. And I would say that that's definitely a bit of a tailwind if you consider the generic food delivery trends that we've tracked. But I will note that even in this last quarter, we're seeing the rate of people talking about pizza deliveries and the rate of people talking about just generic food deliveries fall at about the exact same percentage quarter over quarter. So I think that this in general is just a little bit of a tempering of this behavior of delivery after it was, so prevalent last year, especially. So there's a little bit of normalization across the board for all. But overall, when we're looking at Domino's, I mean, this is the leader. This is almost like the Netflix of streamers, if you will, in this pizza space. And so I think that we'll continue to watch that, that pie chart that we saw to make sure that, Domino's continues to kind of insulate and defend that position that it has.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's been a tough company to bet against over the years. Jenny was talking about the performance over the last decade, so excited for this one. A 5-day slide leading into earnings, too, maybe complicating this a little bit. But, Megan, thanks as always for joining us, the VP of Research at LikeFolio.com. All right.